So to start off the conversation, Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about your group, where you're located, and kind of what the state of business looks like for you right now?
Want to start, Mike?
No, go right ahead, Steve.
Well, I'm in Tucson, Arizona. The group that I formerly was the COO of, and now I'm kind of just the old retired guy, semi-retired guy that goes around and gives advice that nobody has to listen to anymore. But I'm still active on a day-to-day basis. But I don't run things anymore. But I do have a perspective, and my relationship with Mike goes back a long time. We're in Tucson. We have 6 stores, 2 collision centers, two Lexus stores, Jaguar Land Rover, Buick GMC Cadillac, Mini, and Kia. So we have a wide variety of brands. And just as a history, we began with TRG, Rikess Group in '08 planning, and we kicked off negotiation-free selling and One Touch A to Z financial services, sales consultants handling it in '09. In one store, we've evolved since then. So we've been at it a fair amount of time with negotiation-free and one-touch selling. So does that give you a little bit of a background?
It certainly does. Thank you very much. And just I forgot to mention at the beginning, the theme of what we're going to talk about is really execution. I think it's something that that Mike has a lot of insight in, and you obviously have a long relationship executing a certain way to a consumer preference. So I just wanted to put that out there. Execution is kind of the topic that we're going to talk through, and how dealers can execute better now and structure better to execute well. So Steve, thank you for that. Mike, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll just take the conversation from there.
So obviously I'm Mike Anderson of the Rikess Group. Been with part of the Rikess Group now for 8 years this time around. I say that because my original relationship started with Mark Rikess back in February of 1990, and I launched my first One Price stores in February of 1990, and never looked back. One negotiation free. First thing I would say is, besides being a remarkable way to do business, has offered me the opportunity to meet people like Steve and many, many others. It's a real community of dealers, like many dealers, that really like to share and be a part of, and it's been really wonderful. I think that today, and I'm not speaking specifically about our existing event, but I think today we have, I'm working hard to make sure the Rikess Group is growing past just negotiation free, and making sure that we're paying a lot of attention to digital retailing, the processes, people, and requirements necessary to execute that well, along with negotiation-free and single point of contact. So, and I would also just add to that leadership development. I think that's a real important part. You mentioned, Paul, about executing, and it all starts with the leaders. So that's what I would say.
Very good. Well, good. That's a great kickoff to the conversation. So, as someone who has helped Mike, as someone who has helped many, many businesses, many dealerships, transition from what was comfortable to what is uncomfortable, and seeing them through that to that becoming the new comfortable and being a sound model, I think dealers right now are in a big envelope of uncomfortable. Now, all in different phases, because everyone is at a different place in executing digitally, having to, for those who still have to negotiate, negotiating over the phone maybe, which could also be uncomfortable. What are some of the hangups? You started by talking about the leadership of the business. What are some of the mindsets that you always see once somebody makes a decision, okay, this is uncomfortable, but I'm going to try to change something? How does that usually play out in your experience?
Well, that's a big question. We only have how long?
It sure is. No easy questions for the last session, Mike.
So I'm going to try to simplify it, and you can ask a follow-up question. But the first thing I would suggest to you, and the best phrase I ever heard was, once you make a decision, you've got to burn the boat. So land the boat, make the decision, get on the shore, and burn the boats. Because the one disastrous thing you can do, and one of the things I like to say to my participants when I'm holding sessions, is you can't have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And as a leader, that's not only inappropriate, it's unfair to your staff. If you can't lead with conviction and credibility, don't do it. Don't even go there. So the biggest choice, the biggest difficulty is making the decision and not thinking about it. And Paul used the word that is just there's no room for when you make this type of a transformational. It doesn't really matter when you make any kind of a change. There is no let's try it. You're either in or you're out. It's Nike. Just do it.
And so, in this situation that we're in right now, one of the themes that I've been kind of harping on in some of my content in the podcast is that I personally spent a number of weeks just waiting for the moment when what I had and the business that I had to be restored. Like, oh, at any moment this is going to blow by and then it's going to be restored. And then, 3 to 4 weeks in, it really hit home and saying, like, you know what? Like, it's going to have to be reinvented and reimagined. And that could, and then probably another week or two after that, looking over the horizon saying, you know what? This is actually going to be better off reinvented and reimagined than it would be if it was restored. So I think that your encouragement to dealers, like burn the ships, get comfortable, is a theme that actually we've heard from the very first session from Brian Benstock all the way through, that becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable is really something that has to be a decision, has to be a switch that's flipped in the leader's mind, so then he can lead his people through whatever the transition, whatever the change has to be. Am I summing that up in a good way?
Yeah, you are. I think that it's really important. I would add just a couple quick things to that. And what I would say is I think that as leaders today, first of all, if it's uncomfortable to think about where we are now, you better get comfortable with it, because it's not even going to be the same 2 weeks from now. I think there's a very good chance that, just as an example, we'll see a little bit of a bump in business, which, by the way, I think could be as dangerous as positive. I'll speak to that in just a quick second. But, I just spent the entire morning doing digital sales training with the team, right? And I listened to this Simon Sinek video with when I train these things. And there's an example called the diffusion of innovation, right? And early adopters, and in the middle, and then you've got laggards. And the reference was that in terms of digital retailing, which, by the way, is where we're headed, everybody else is there. The only reason the car industry is not taking a significant jump is because we're going kicking and scratching and fighting. Every other retailer has done that. So what's the point? If you are not comfortable with change today, you've got to get some help around that, become a learning organization, figure that out, because this change we're on it is just a catalyst. We're going to have a whole different industry a year from now, and you've got to embrace that change. I think you said it really well. There's a little bit of ramble, but
Steve, that's okay. No, it's good. This is supposed to be. It's live. We're not editing this. It's as it comes out. Steve, moving to you. So you're someone who has obviously led an organization through change over many years, and now you kind of get a little more of a bird's eye view on historical context on how that went. You have fresh perspective on what's going on in your store. Like you said, you get to float around, which in essence takes you out of the heat of the battle. So maybe you can see even a little bit more clearly. Can you talk about the situation in your group as you started? Maybe talk about even when you initially made the switch to be a one-price dealer a long time ago, and then also what you see as maybe the biggest leadership challenges existing in your group today.
Well, I think, from a historical perspective, Paul, which is really key to this, franchise dealer system has been in place for over 100 years now. And believe it or not, I started at it 52 years ago. So I've got 52 years of doing this, which is good and bad. A lot of people say, why the hell are you still doing it if you've been doing it this long? You should have hung it up. But I tell you, now it's so exciting. I wish it was 50 years younger. It is so exciting what's going on, because for the majority of that 100 years, up until probably the last 5 or 6, it was pretty much the same. The dealers operated pretty much the same. And as the digital world started to come into play, then you get into the whole thing you're just talking about, which the phrase, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, is so critical. So that's why it's so exciting, because it's challenging and you have to try new things. And then you run into that roadblock you're just speaking about, which ultimately comes down to the culture of the organization. Mike touched on it. You're not going to get this done if you don't have a culture in your organization that is receptive to change and being willing to be resilient and adaptable to it. So to answer your question, how did we get through it? It was necessity that we started on this process. We kind of knew inherently that the negotiation part of it was a major pain point for the customer. They didn't like it. We have Lexus stores, and you know the mantra of Lexus when they began, it was all customer first. So you begin with the customer, and think about it from the customer's perspective. They didn't like what we were doing. So we started with a store that we felt like we could, let's call it experiment. The downside risk wasn't that great because the store wasn't performing that well to begin with. And so we began down that, and I was fortunate that I had a young group of people without a lot of experience that were, okay, we'll try, we'll do it differently, we'll do this. We didn't have a lot of people who were fully entrenched in the old way of negotiations and let's create friction, let's slow it all down so we can get control. So we worked through it. We also then began at the same time, which in those days was pretty much, I was called crazy, because we also eliminated F&I at that time. Same time. We did them both at the same time. I would tell you it was extremely painful. And Mike, Dan Karanuk, who works with Mike, helped us work through that. We worked through it together. There was no playbook in those days. There were so few people doing it, but we worked through it because we had a team that was understanding of it, and we made it palatable for them. We gave them some protection, so there wasn't as much risk to them. And we just kept working and working and working. And here we are, we're 11 years later, and we're still not there. I mean, we're a long ways from where we need to be. I'd say we've evolved well. There have been things that have came out of it that we didn't know going in with the buy center concept, so that the sales manager's roles totally changed. And so
do you have buy centers right now?
That and training the leadership and recasting, this sort of thing. So does that answer your question? It has been a difficult road. And then when you transition that same process to stores, as you move it through the rest.
It does answer my question. Let me ask you a question on something you just said. Do you currently have buy centers as a part of your model?
Gone through it, and you know how to initially whether you. Yes, we do. So think about it this way in a very specific sense. Typically, in most stores, the sales manager is the one who is determining rate on the transaction, the interest rate. They may be determining who the lender is. The rate certainly influences dramatically the payment presentation and so on. And the sales manager is the one doing that. They're the ones pulling credit, that sort of thing. And we learned early on through another Rikess client that there was a way to maybe do that a little differently, and with a buy center concept where you took the sales manager out of that. And they basically did what they're supposed to do, which is coach and develop and train salespeople, engage with the customer, and enhance the transaction, the experience for the customer, and take that administrative part out of it and develop a team behind them that not only did the paperwork processing for the sales consultant who was doing the sale of the financial service products like traditional F&I, but also was administering the rate based on pulling credit and determining who the lender was and what the rate was going to be used for that specific customer. So instead of throwing a rate out there that made the transaction work only to find out that would not work with a lender, we just reversed it with the buy center. So our initial presentation to the customer is geared toward what that rate will be on a final transaction, not necessarily exactly, but close. And so we enhanced the process dramatically for the customer. We speeded it up dramatically, and we got a lot of things off the sales manager's plate and put them in a better position to enhance the customer experience and salesperson's productivity. We also, in the process of that, because of our market, and I think I mentioned this to you the other day, and Mike is certainly familiar with it, we got very adept at subprime. And subprime has always been a sticking point deal. Say, I don't want to mess with it, it takes too much time, there's too much hair on a deal, and so on and so forth. And we're really pretty good at it. We transact a subprime customer in 25 minutes from the time we've selected a car till the time we have that paper hung and we have that deal buttoned up. And that's awfully good. Now we use a tool, an electronic tool with it, and so on and so forth. But that's what the evolution looked like. That's the change. that occurred just because of the journey we went down, and we just never stopped.
That's really good insight. I think even like just bringing subprime into the conversation is something we haven't touched on at all today, but I definitely have heard that from quite a few dealers as I talk to dealers around the country that subprime is going to present a new or fresh opportunity for those who are willing to look at it and treat it similarly as they do the other retail experiences. I think subprime has always gotten like an asterisk next to it as there was more flexibility in customer experience because the need was maybe a little more intense or the requirements were a little more narrow. Mike, can you talk for a few minutes about how you see one price and subprime working? Like, do you see that model? Like, obviously you do business with Steve. Do you have other dealers that transact a good subprime business by being one price?
So it was good. Thanks for asking that. I was going to suggest that Steve does that within a one-price environment, and I've had the experience of doing it myself. So first of all, they work together. But I think that in order for a negotiation-free dealer or a one-price dealer to make secondary finance or non-prime finance work well, the first thing you have to do, again, we're back to culture, is to look at that portion of your business differently. And I'm just going to speak for myself and for the dealer group I did this at. We looked at that as a growth pattern for our future business. So let me be really specific about that. When a guest came to us and they were considered non-prime, we did have a bullpen of specific vehicles because really they're not buying a car, they're buying a deal or buying a transaction. But where we wanted to make sure we could build business, future business, was instead of maximizing gross, which may sound like an ugly statement in this particular environment, we determined a reasonable gross and put the customer in the car in the right payment, so that with the objective or with the goal that in 12 or 18 months we could call that customer back, get them out of that heavy interest transaction and into a lower interest rate car, into a better car, and build that cycle. And I'm just going to suggest to you, for us, it was very successful. And that was in South Georgia, where it was a bit ago, but to put that in perspective, our average credit score was 540 in 3 stores. So we had plenty of opportunity with that.
So I think kind of we're kind of wrapping up and we're running out of time. I know these sessions go so fast. What I think one of the things and one of the themes that has come out of this is that whatever you decide to do, you have to go all in. And this is maybe a time when people are a little timid by nature because they're waiting for what has been to come back. But what I'm hearing both of you say is, like, when you decide to go all in and have a tight model, because when you have a tight model with good rules, you can actually execute consistently to whatever you set out to do. And I see both of you nodding your heads, so I'm going to accept that as an agreement. What I would like to do is, like, imagine you have 30 seconds to speak with every dealer in the country. What are you going to say to them in your 30 seconds? So Steve, I'll go to you first, and then we'll close out with Mike. So Steve, you have eye contact with every dealer in the country individually. What are you going to encourage them with?
Okay. We were part of a founding of a software development company for subprime. And in doing that, I was in contact with a lot of dealers around the country, many of whom said, we don't do any subprime business, we don't have any subprime market. And I would tell you right now, there is not a market in the United States. There's no dealer that does not have huge subprime opportunity. They just don't look at it because in many cases, their managers don't want to screw around with it, so they just don't pay attention. But it's there. It is going to be very robust coming out of this. And if they want an opportunity to have be able to execute well and treat that customer well and have them come back, as Mike talked about, they need to look into it because it's right in front of them. How you execute, it's a commitment to it. You just have to commit that I'm going to make it work and get through the stuff you're going to have with resistance to it.
Very good. Thank you for that. Mike, you have the attention of every dealer in the country for 30 seconds. Eye to eye, what are you going to encourage them with?
So the first thing I would say is become a learning organization. Invest in your middle management. we're asking a lot of new things for our middle management teams. You know, we throw the word coach around over and over and over again, and most of those hardworking, diligently hardworking people got those positions not because they were good coaches, for other reasons. They were good transactors. They need to learn and need to be taught how to do the new role. So become a learning organization, think about your culture, people and process, and invest in your people.
Very good. Gentlemen, thank you so much for kind of pulling up the tail end of the show for us and ending us with a bang. We'll do this again. I just want to thank you for your time and wish you the best of health and success as we move through this.
Oh, thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Paul. It's good being with you. Best success to everybody.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.